Claire never imagined that a second marriage could feel like both a fresh start and the beginning of something much darker. She had met David through mutual friends, a quiet man with a distinguished air, 15 years older, and seemingly grounded in all the ways her first husband hadn't been. He was stable, successful, and attentive. He also came with a teenage son, Ryan, who had been living with him full-time since his divorce. David described Ryan as a young man trying to find his way after a few missteps. Claire, ever the optimist, thought she could be a positive influence in his life. She had no children of her own, and in some ways the idea of guiding a young man into adulthood gave her a sense of purpose. When Claire moved into David's home, a large modern house nestled on the outskirts of a quiet Oregon town, everything seemed peaceful on the surface. The house was decorated in clean lines and muted tones, the kind of place that felt like a permanent pause from the chaos of her past. Ryan greeted her politely when she first arrived, shook her hand, and called her Claire instead of the mom title she never expected. He was well-groomed, soft-spoken, and distant, not cold but not exactly warm either. Claire told herself that was normal. He was 19, still figuring things out, probably used to things falling apart. Maybe he was just cautious about someone new in his life. For the first few weeks, Claire tried not to overstep. She respected Ryan's space, only offering casual conversations and simple dinners. He often left the house shortly after returning from community college classes and didn't come back until late at night. Sometimes she heard the front door open at 2 or 3 in the morning. David never questioned it. "He's just blowing off steam," he said one night. "I did the same at his age." But things started to bother Claire in subtle, creeping ways. A jacket Ryan wore frequently had lipstick smudged on the collar. Not once, but several times. There were receipts in his pockets for things that didn't make sense. Expensive meals, designer perfume, luxury hotel stays. Not the kind of places a college student on a budget would frequent. Once, while doing laundry, Claire found an envelope with over $800 in cash stuffed between Ryan's folded jeans. He hadn't started a job since she moved in. She told herself maybe he had side gigs. She didn't ask questions. One night, while taking out the trash, Claire noticed something odd. A torn photograph sat on top of the bin, partially covered by an empty pizza box. She reached in and pulled it out. The photo had been ripped down the middle. What remained showed a woman, maybe mid-40s, attractive and very put together, smiling with her arm around someone who had been cropped out. Claire studied the photo for a long time. It had the polished look of something printed from a professional photo shoot, not a candid phone picture. The woman wore a gold necklace with a large stone that gleamed even under the dim porch light. Claire felt a chill, but she threw the photo back in the trash. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, her mind wandered more and more. Was Ryan involved with someone older? Was he being taken advantage of? Or was he the one doing the manipulating? Her instincts told her something was wrong, but she had no real proof. And she didn't want to disturb the fragile harmony of her new life. After all, she had promised herself she wouldn't be the type of stepmother who snooped or judged. But something deep down nagged at her. Something about Ryan's cool demeanor, his late nights, and the expensive items that didn't add up. Claire's curiosity grew into quiet observation. She started mentally logging his schedule. She noticed patterns. Specific nights he always dressed better, always left with a different kind of energy, almost excitement. She started checking his laundry not just to clean it, but to look for clues. Once, she found a hotel keycard wedged between 2 of his textbooks. Another time she spotted a strand of long blonde hair clinging to the passenger seat of his car. And still, she said nothing. But by then, the seeds of suspicion had rooted deep. Claire no longer felt like she was simply living in someone else's home. She felt like she was slowly unlocking a secret, What she didn't yet know was how far the truth would stretch, or how much danger came with discovering it. Claire's quiet suspicion began to evolve into something closer to obsession. The more she observed Ryan, the more the little inconsistencies added up, like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit the picture she had been told. The Thursday night routine in particular stood out. Every Thursday, without fail, Ryan would leave the house around 7:30 p.m., dressed better than usual. He wore expensive cologne, styled his hair meticulously, and always took his car, never asking for a ride, never giving an explanation. He would return sometime after 2 a.m., never making noise, never stumbling and drunk or disorderly. It was calculated, precise, practiced. Claire mentioned it to David once casually, almost offhandedly. "Does Ryan have a night class on Thursdays?" she asked over dinner. David didn't look up from his plate. "No, I think that's just his night to hang out with friends. Nothing to worry about." And that was the end of the conversation. But Claire did worry. Not just because of the secrecy, but because the signs were beginning to form a pattern too consistent to ignore. That's when she decided to take a more deliberate approach. She installed a basic security system under the pretense of home safety. Just a doorbell camera and a couple of indoor motion sensors. Nothing too invasive. She told David it was for peace of mind. He nodded, appreciating her initiative. What she didn't say was that the system uploaded footage to her private cloud storage. Claire began logging Ryan's comings and goings, keeping a private journal of his movements. She tracked times, outfits, the occasional small detail, like whether he left with a bag or returned empty-handed. Then, something happened that shifted her passive suspicion into something more urgent. While cleaning up after breakfast, she borrowed Ryan's laptop to look up a recipe. He had left it open on the dining room table, and though she hesitated, her curiosity got the better of her. She noticed a folder on the desktop with a bland title. Archive Daozo 7. It was password protected, but the temptation was too strong. After several guesses, she entered his birth date and the folder unlocked. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Inside were dozens of images, photos of Ryan with different women. None of them seemed his age. Most were significantly older, dressed in business attire or elegant dresses, sometimes taken in upscale restaurants, other times in what looked like hotel rooms. In each photo, Ryan was close to them, affectionate, smiling, and in several the women looked uncomfortable, caught off guard or mid-conversation. Claire scrolled further and found documents, scanned receipts from luxury hotels, designer stores, even airplane boarding passes. Most of them were not in Ryan's name. Some were for two people. All of them were dated Thursday nights. At the bottom of the folder was a scanned handwritten note. It read, "Leverage, just in case." Claire's stomach turned. This wasn't just a series of affairs. There was something methodical, something predatory, about the way Ryan had collected this information. These weren't memories or romantic souvenirs, they were records, evidence, insurance. For a long time, Claire just sat there staring at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. It was one thing to suspect Ryan of sneaking around or being involved with older women. It was another to discover he was cataloging each interaction like a project, as though each woman was a case study. Later that week, she began digging through the trash again, not for evidence but out of a grim curiosity. That's when she found the first printed invoice. It was for a luxury spa resort 2 towns over. The room had been booked for 2 nights. The billing name wasn't Ryan's, but the date was a Thursday. The address on the invoice led her to a real estate agent named Linda Vaughn. The name sounded familiar, and after some checking, Claire realized she was one of David's acquaintances from a local fundraiser. Claire's heart pounded. These women weren't strangers. They were part of their world. Women who would never admit to an affair with a teenager. especially one they saw as the stepson of a respected architect. That made them perfect targets. The next Thursday, Claire parked a few streets away and waited in her car. Just before 8 p.m., she saw Ryan pull up in his car to the entrance of a boutique hotel. Moments later, a woman stepped out of a sleek black SUV and walked straight into his arms. Claire took a photo with her phone and sat back. Her breath caught somewhere between fear and resolve. She wasn't just imagining things anymore. Ryan was living a double life. One meticulously crafted, well hidden, and far more dangerous than she ever expected. Claire's heart was still pounding as she sat in her car, parked beneath the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. She hadn't meant to follow Ryan, at least that's what she told herself. But deep down, she knew she needed confirmation. What she had seen on his computer couldn't be dismissed. The photos, the receipts, the names, everything pointed to something far more deliberate than simple youthful rebellion. Now, watching Ryan embrace yet another older woman outside a hotel, Claire felt a strange mix of vindication and fear. She didn't recognize this woman. Taller than the others, wearing a red coat and heels too high for the cobblestone sidewalk, she clung to Ryan like someone desperate for comfort. They laughed, kissed, and disappeared through the hotel's front doors. Claire took a single photo with her phone and drove away before anyone could see her. Her hands shook the entire drive home. Back at the house, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the woman's smile, Ryan's hand resting on the small of her back, the ease with which he navigated the moment. There was nothing awkward or uncertain about it. Ryan knew exactly what he was doing. And this, Claire realized, was only one of many. The next morning, while David was out running errands, Claire began digging deeper. She remembered something from a week earlier, a late-night doorbell notification she had ignored at the time. She opened the app connected to the home security system and pulled up the footage. The video was grainy in the early morning darkness, but clear enough to make out the shape of a woman at the front door. Claire paused, leaned closer, and played the video again. It was just after 3 a.m. The same woman in the red coat from the hotel. She looked disheveled, anxious. Ryan opened the door and stepped outside to speak with her. Their conversation was muted, but the woman appeared frantic, waving her hands and clutching something in her purse. After a tense exchange, she handed Ryan a thick envelope. He opened it briefly, nodded, then walked back inside. The woman left in a hurry, glancing around as if she didn't want to be seen. Claire replayed it several times. Whatever was in that envelope, it wasn't love letters. It looked like cash. Now things were becoming clearer, and far more disturbing. Ryan wasn't just having affairs with older women, he was demanding money. Claire didn't know if it was blackmail or manipulation, but the outcome was the same. He had power over them, and they were paying to keep something hidden. She decided it was time to confront someone outside the family. Using the receipt she had found earlier, Claire tracked down one of the women, Cynthia, a real estate agent from a nearby town. The receipt had been from a spa, and Claire found the woman's business profile online. She emailed under the guise of a client, scheduled a casual meeting, and met her in the cafe of a local bookstore. Cynthia looked tired. Her eyes darted around the room even before Claire introduced herself. When Claire explained who she was and that she was Ryan's stepmother, Cynthia turned pale. For a moment she denied knowing who Ryan was, but after a long pause she folded. She admitted that she had met Ryan through a networking event. He was charming, attentive, and made her feel young again. But soon after they became involved, things changed. Ryan began asking questions about her finances, her marriage, and even hinted at telling her husband about them. Then came the first request for money, small at first, framed as a loan, then larger amounts more frequent, and always with the unspoken threat that if she refused, there would be consequences. Cynthia said she knew she wasn't alone. There were others. Some she met through Ryan, others she only heard about when their names were dropped casually in conversation. She believed Ryan kept trophies, photos, texts, recordings, proof of their affairs, of their weaknesses, and he made it clear that he wasn't afraid to use them. Claire left the meeting shaken. It was worse than she thought. Ryan wasn't just manipulating vulnerable women, he was exploiting them systematically. His behavior wasn't careless or youthful. It was calculated, rehearsed, and dangerously effective. When she returned home, she opened the envelope she'd found taped under Ryan's desk the day before. Inside was a USB drive. Claire plugged it into her laptop, unsure of what she would find. What she saw made her blood run cold. There were call recordings, email screenshots, even videos taken without the women's knowledge. One folder was labeled Future Targets, with names and photos of women who had never even met Ryan yet. Notes beside their names included details like husband travels, owns rental property, seen at local wine bar alone. Claire realized with sickening certainty, this wasn't over. Ryan wasn't just living a double life. He was building an empire of secrets, one woman at a time. Claire knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. The information on the USB drive was overwhelming. It wasn't just evidence of past manipulation. It was a roadmap for future schemes. Ryan had laid out an entire system for finding, targeting, and exploiting women, with the cold precision of someone who saw emotions as nothing more than tools. Every folder, every note, every file added a layer to the truth that Claire had been afraid to admit. Her stepson wasn't just troubled, he was dangerous. Her first instinct was to go straight to David. He had to know. But the timing had to be right. Claire had no idea how he would react. Would he believe her? Or would he see her as an outsider turning on his son? She needed more than evidence. She needed undeniable proof, something David couldn't dismiss as speculation or misunderstanding. So she began organizing everything. She created backup copies of the USB files, printed the receipts, and compiled a detailed timeline of Ryan's movements, contacts, and financial patterns. It was like building a case for a trial. She even cataloged the names and details of the women involved, marking which ones had been confirmed through conversation, video, or digital trace. Each night, she reviewed the files alone in her room. She barely slept. She couldn't. Every moment she closed her eyes, she imagined another woman falling into Ryan's trap. The most chilling thought was how effortlessly he had managed to deceive everyone. He had been right under their noses for months, playing the role of the quiet, reserved young man trying to get back on his feet. All the while, he was cultivating a network of secrets designed to give him control. Then came the break she didn't expect. While sorting through old mail in the kitchen, Claire found an unmarked envelope addressed to David. It was tucked between junk flyers and a credit card offer, nearly missed entirely. She opened it, assuming it was harmless. Inside were printed photos, grainy stills taken from a hotel surveillance camera, Ryan and a woman embracing, Ryan entering a room, Ryan counting a thick stack of cash in a hallway. No sender, no note. Just silent accusation. Claire immediately showed the photos to Cynthia, the real estate agent she had spoken with before. Cynthia confirmed that one of the women in the images was someone she had met briefly, another of Ryan's victims who had since moved out of town after a personal crisis. It became clear that someone else out there knew what Ryan was doing. Someone was watching him too. Claire wondered if it was one of the women, maybe someone who had found the courage to fight back. Or maybe it was someone Ryan had pushed too far. Either way, it meant the walls were closing in, and Claire knew she had to act before something irreversible happened. The moment came a few nights later. David had just finished a late dinner and was relaxing in the den. Claire sat down beside him, holding the envelope of photos and a printed stack of documents. She said nothing at first, just placed them in his lap. As he flipped through the materials, his expression changed slowly, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something harder. Betrayal, pain. Claire explained everything. The footage, the files, the victims. She laid out the evidence with the calm of someone who had no room left for doubt. David didn't say much. He listened, nodded occasionally, but didn't interrupt. When she was done, he simply asked where the USB drive was. That night there was shouting. Claire stayed upstairs while father and son argued below. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, denial, desperation. Something broke, a door slammed, and then silence. Ryan didn't come home the next day, or the day after. 3 days later, the police found his car abandoned near the Washington border. The keys were in the ignition and a printed stack of papers sat in the passenger seat. Claire recognized them immediately. They were pages from her own notes, altered to suggest that she had fabricated the entire situation, framing Ryan out of jealousy or spite. He had even included a letter, forged in David's handwriting, expressing regret and confusion over Claire's obsession. It was a last attempt to escape the consequences, but it didn't work. Once the other women came forward, some reluctantly, some with their own files and evidence, the narrative shifted. Authorities opened an investigation, and Claire was cleared within weeks. David, devastated, moved out shortly after. He said he needed time to process it all, to mourn the son he thought he had. Claire stayed in the house alone, haunted not by guilt but by relief. She had done what needed to be done, but even with Ryan gone, his presence lingered in the silence, in the memories, and in the broken trust he left behind. Claire woke each morning in a house that felt quieter than it had ever been. The echo of Ryan's absence hung in the air like a thick fog. Despite everything that had happened, the confrontation, the discoveries, the exposure of the truth, there was no sense of triumph, only emptiness. The silence was heavier than the chaos had ever been. The police had launched a formal investigation after Ryan's disappearance, but without a body, without a crime scene, and with no definitive proof of what happened after he abandoned his car, there wasn't much they could do. The vehicle had been left near a wooded highway just miles from the Washington border. Inside were all the signs of a staged narrative. Documents falsely implicating Claire, photographs edited to twist timelines, and a farewell letter that lacked any sincerity. The words tried to paint Ryan as a victim of lies, betrayal, and emotional abuse at the hands of his stepmother. But the evidence Claire had gathered, combined with the testimonies from the women he had exploited, told a much different story. The investigation eventually turned its attention toward Ryan himself. He was officially listed as a missing person, but law enforcement believed he had likely orchestrated his disappearance. There were no signs of foul play at the car site, no blood, no struggle, not even footprints leading into the forest. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Some believed he had fled the country using fake identification. Others speculated that someone he had hurt had finally retaliated. Claire didn't know what to believe. She just knew that her life had been changed forever. David, once her anchor, couldn't face her anymore. The night after Ryan vanished, he packed a suitcase and told Claire he needed to be somewhere else. There were no harsh words, no blame, just a deep sadness in his eyes. He said he loved her, but he didn't know how to live with the truth. He needed time, space, clarity. Claire let him go, even though it broke her heart. He had lost a son, not to death but to revelation. And she had lost the marriage that had once promised peace. Alone in the house, Claire began to rebuild herself. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could find a way to ensure it didn't happen to others. Slowly, she started reaching out to the women she had come to know through the investigation. Some wanted to forget everything, to disappear and pretend it hadn't happened. Others were angry not just at Ryan, but at themselves, for being vulnerable, for ignoring red flags, for staying silent. With their permission, Claire began documenting their stories, anonymously at first. She compiled what she had learned into a series of blog posts aimed at raising awareness about emotional manipulation, coercion, and financial abuse. The response was overwhelming. Women from all over wrote to her, sharing similar stories, thanking her for her honesty and courage. What had started as a desperate attempt to protect herself and her family was becoming a platform for education and empowerment. In time, Claire was invited to speak at local women's shelters and advocacy groups. She told her story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She didn't paint herself as a hero, just someone who had seen something she couldn't ignore and decided to act. Her message was simple. Sometimes the danger isn't obvious. Sometimes it wears a smile and lives in your own home. But silence is what lets it grow. As for Ryan, his whereabouts remained a mystery. Every few months, someone would claim to have seen him, working under a different name in a new city, traveling with a woman who didn't know his past, or living off the grid entirely. But none of these leads were ever confirmed. The possibility that he was still out there kept Claire vigilant. She never stopped locking the doors at night, never stopped checking her surroundings when she was alone. But fear no longer ruled her. She had already faced the worst: discovery, betrayal, and loss. What remained was resilience. Years later, when asked what made her act, Claire always answered the same way. Because I saw something no one else wanted to see. And I knew I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I had to step in. Because if I didn't, who would? And in the quiet that followed, you could hear the strength in her voice. Shaped not by the horrors she uncovered, but by the courage it took to bring them into the light.